Hello, everybody, and welcome to In Conversation. My name is Ngozi Nnaji, and I am the founder and managing partner of ACO Insurance Consulting. This conversational series, is being sponsored and hosted by Animal Farm Foundation in partnership with ACO. And can I tell you guys, I'm a little excited, no, a lot excited to be here with you guys today. This is not the first conversation that we've had around this topic, which we'll get into in a minute. And it won't be the last, but definitely one that is worth repeating. So again, my name is Ngozi Nnaji, but I have a very special guest with me today. Y'all, she in my home, y'all. She's in my
You are
home.
in your whole house.
Right, in my whole house. So I have Kassidi Jones with me today, and this is a very special conversation I'm having with you today. And so, really, for me, and why this is kind of this a personal passion of mine, if you will, is most of you know, my audience knows that I've been in the industry 25 years. Good, bad, and the ugly
All
in
right.
the insurance industry. And what I've found over the last 5 years is that, there's a part of me, there's this passion, there's this purpose to be more intentional about what I do, how I show up as it relates to racism, systemic racism, and discrimination, right? And so, systemic racism shows up everywhere in the
Everywhere.
US, right? It's
Every
particularly the
corner.
US, right? And so it takes us to different conversations, different avenues, different realities. And so, audience, this is why we're here, right? This is a reality that, that has been, I've been made aware of. It impacts my industry. And so wanted to have this conversation. But I want the audience to get to know a little bit something about you, Kassidi.
Something about
All the
me.
somethings.
Okay, so Pisces Sun, Pisces Rising, Cancer Moon. I'm Cassidy. I am a fifth year PhD candidate at Yale University in African American Studies and English, and I'm the content creator behind an Instagram account called Ginger's Naps, which is like half showing off my really cute dog and half the history behind blackness, anti-blackness, and dog ownership in the United States. So a nice little mix of those. That's what I'm passionate about, I guess. I didn't know I was passionate about it until I made this Instagram account, which again was
Really?
just for my cute dog.
Right.
Yeah.
Ginger, you're so cute, but we also have to
Right.
talk about
Exactly.
this,
But
right?
also racist.
Right.
Right.
No, I love it because I do think that a lot of people, right? Although as minorities, as black and brown people in general, right, we face discrimination. Sometimes we recognize it for what it is, sometimes we don't. But I think, it is important for us to realize that we, as well as our allies, play a part in addressing this in the US. And so that's why we're kind of having this conversation, y'all. I mean, when you think about race, when you think about dogs, not often do you have those two same words in the same conversation, or the two words in the same conversation. It's not obvious, right? But we want to make it obvious. We want to make it such that you are educated, you become aware, and then there's a call to action. You want to do something. Because as we said, racism shows up everywhere. And so why not have that discussion around dog ownership, pet ownership, and what we can do about it? So I think I'd like to start, if it's okay with you, Kassidi, just around a little education. Get
Yeah.
the people up to
Let's do
speed
it.
around some stats, some information.
It's my favorite
I
thing.
know. It's funny because I'm an actuary by degree, not by trade. Right? I don't do it now. And people, I always tell people I'm all about the numbers, right? Because the numbers are kind of the foundation of the whys and what fors and how we move forward. So just to give you guys a little bit of information, not sure if you know, but 69 million households, and this is as of 2022, right? This year, have pets, particularly dogs, right? Dogs are the most common pets that people have in their homes. And that's like 7 out of 10 households. And that's a lot. Now, I don't have a dog. I got 4 kids, so y'all can translate that.
You know, when I
Nothing
came in
against
here,
dogs,
I
nothing
was
against
looking for one.
kids. You were looking for
I was
what?
looking for one. You had the shirt on? I was
I
like,
know I'm representing. But my 4 kids keep me busy, right? So they are my pets. Any mothers and fathers, or mother likes or father likes, you get what I'm saying around that. But it also should be noted that even during the pandemic, right? So from March 2020 to March 2021, we saw an increase in the number of households acquired pets, particularly dogs. 1 out of 5 households acquired a dog in that 1 year time frame,
wow.
which is interesting, right? Because again, we knew that there was this familiarity with the American family around pet ownership, but again, the need for emotional support, right, during the pandemic, the need for companionship during the pandemic increased the desire for people to have pets into their families.
Ginger's a pandemic puppy.
Yep. Yes, she
She is.
is.
Yeah.
See? See? And you know what? We're going to have to show them later a picture of Ginger. Just saying. I mean,
I
because
got
everybody.
plenty. Let me.
I've seen her Instagram account. She has plenty. But we should also know that, again, when we talk about pet ownership, it is the demographics around who owns pets are real, right? So about 45% of non-Hispanic whites own pets, or excuse me, yes, pets. And but 45%, I said that wrong, 45% of Hispanics. So the number around, let me get, see, I'm old, y'all, so I got to go back to the data. I got to go back. 58, I'm sorry, let's correct that. 58 of non-Hispanic whites own pets, while 45% of Hispanics own pets and 24% of Black families own pets, right? So we're looking at that number decreasing depending on the demographic. But again, the need, the desire for pets in the households is increasing across all demographics. So let's make that reality known. But with that being said, right, let's talk about this correlation that exists, right? So we know Americans are pet friendly, dog friendly, right? Regardless of the demographic, that number is increasing. But then how is that showing up in racism? Or why does that matter in racism? And so I'm going to let Cassie do most of the talking this.
Okay.
This is where she shines.
Are we taking it way back?
We take it
all the way back?
So we know and maybe you don't know, and so this is where the education continues and the awareness continues. But there is this inherent bias and perception that exists, negative, not positive, around Black and brown people and specifically dogs.
Especially
so
dogs.
talk about it. Take them all the way back.
We're taking it all the way back.
Take it all the way
My
back.
dissertation is in the 19th century, so that's where most of my research takes place. So if you want to take it all the way back, you got to start with enslavement in the United States when white people owned people and also pets. Those white people also got to decide whether or not the people they owned had dogs or cats. A lot of them were afraid of Black people, especially enslaved Black people, having dogs because they feared the dogs would be used against them in an uprising. And that's because dogs are being used against Black people for violence. So of course they thought the weapon would be turned back on them. You've got what were called Negro dogs being trained to specifically target and hunt Black people. Frederick Douglass has a passage in one of his, he has so many books, in one of his books, where he talks about how enslaved people were made to like tease or beat dogs in order to get those dogs to learn to turn on Black people specifically. So from day one, you have this opposition being set up between Black folks and animals. And then once more Black people are getting free, this is in the mid 19th century, but still starting before, white people are starting to write legislation to ban Black people from having dogs, free or enslaved. Because again, they think those dogs specifically are going to be unruly. Where have we heard that before? Those dogs specifically owned by Black people are the ones that are going to have bad behavior. They're going to attack sheep. They're going to damage our crops. They're going to be a mess. So we just think they shouldn't have any. That starts as early as 1807. It's continuing until after during and after Reconstruction, after enslavement has been legally prohibited. So that opposition still exists. We're still trying to keep Black people from having dogs in general. That's definitely going to feed into this lower percentage that we see today. We weren't raised to pass down dogs in our families, love dogs in our families because we have this violent past. Or legal prohibition stopping us from having Black family dogs and teaching our children to have their own family dogs and so on and so forth. So once you get into the 20th century, you see this extension of the Negro dog in canine forces with police dogs also primarily being used to attack Black people, Black bodies. That's still going on as recently as 2019, I think, is when the Department of Justice did that research report about the Ferguson Police Department and found that in every single canine bite case where race was mentioned, that person was a Black person. So every time the Ferguson Police Department sicked a dog on someone, that person was black, and we know that that's not coincidental. It's historic. We see the precedent with the Negro dogs being trained specifically to target black people. So I think these demographics that we're seeing speak to the fact that we've kind of been pit against each other from day one. It's been 200 years of black people and dogs coming head to head. However, and this is what comes up in my dissertation, there's also been a lot of love. There's a lot of evidence that folks who were enslaved, who could have pets, really bonded with those pets in a very deep and special way. Those pets helped them, especially dogs, helped them bring in extra income, extra sustenance through hunting, as well as just companionship that was denied to them. So I think it's important to tell both halves of that story.
Right.
We can see where the negative history comes up in the numbers that we're seeing today, but it's also important to recognize that the story of black folks and their pets isn't one of just cruelty and tragedy. There has always been love.
Right. And I think that's the story, right? To your point, that needs to be kind of made more public, made more known, right? And but what I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about, so great history lesson, right? Great history lesson, because I mean, even when when you look at the pictures of the civil rights movement, right, and the how police were using dogs to break up even those type of events and activities. It's continuous, right? There's not like a stop and start. There's this continuous storyline around the contention between blacks and dogs. But what I want to talk about is even the correlation more specifically to pit bull related or pit bull type, because we want to get into this breed conversation because that's real too, right? And so pit bull like breeds, like where did that come from, right?
Yeah, that history is its own story.
Another history lesson, y'all. Like, I hope y'all taking notes.
Let's dig into it.
Because y'all see me look down, I'm typing myself. I'm taking notes too, right?
Yeah, so when pit bulls get over here, this is something that I learned from Brown and Dickey's book, that when we first started seeing...
Wait, tell people about the brown... Look,
Shoot.
Look. If you need a copy, holla at us. We got a lot.
Let's talk about it. It's called Pitbull, The Battle Over an American Icon. And it tells you the history of pit bulls and BSL in the United States.
BSL, breed specific legislation.
Right. Yes, thank you. So it starts with white folks. White folks are the ones breeding pit bulls, and especially the ones fighting pit bulls. You get working class white folks in the South, white men in the South, who are dominating this field. And the American Pit Bull Terrier, that breed starts with a white dog fighter in the South once again. So I think it's really interesting how it flips. It flips. That's the late 1800s, I think around 1880s, when the American Pit Bull Terrier started being bred intentionally that way. But then you get World War I and World War II, and the pit bull becomes this like American mascot. You see paraphernalia about the wars, not paraphernalia, propaganda about the wars, especially signage and stuff, where pit bulls are representing American countries and there are other dogs representing other countries. But it's a symbol, it's an American icon, like Brown and Dickey says. That starts to change around the late 20th century when black and brown folks start entering the dog fighting business and the dog breeding business to try to supplement the income that's being denied to them. It's all definitely about class. In a country built on racial capitalism, you cannot separate these issues. So when black folks start entering the game and are doing so more than white folks, that's when America decides that pit bulls are bad. They become more associated with blackness and criminality because they see pit bulls in these poor neighborhoods where there is gang violence, but also a lot of families who just can't afford to move somewhere else. They're getting pit bulls to protect themselves and their families. So once you see the tides turning and pit bulls being more associated with the ghetto, that's when you start getting this demonization and criminalization of a dog breed in specific. So yeah, that's the late 20th century, and that's when the first wave of really intentional and forceful breed-specific legislation starts right at that moment. We're getting tough on crime, tough on drugs, tough on Black people, and subsequently tough on pit bulls.
So I mean, so I want to just again connect the dots for people, because again, it's important to realize that these perceptions, these biases that are being developed over time, gets us to where we are today, right? And so to your point, this negative connotation around this breed of dogs, pit bulls, and again, I'm using the term as more of a total breed, not a specific breed or a total group of dogs around similar profile. Profiling just came in. Like the whole concept of profile. I was like, hold on. Right. I was like, all right, take it back. Hold on. But I mean, if you understand that, right, and you understand that negative connotation, then you can start to see how this conversation that we're going to continue to have today leads us into why breed restrictions or breed specific legislation are so negative, right? It's not necessarily something that we want to have existing in our culture and our society, because again, much like we oust and try to segregate and separate, right, races, right, that's actually what we're doing to dogs, which also indirectly impacts people, right? So let's talk about breed specific legislation.
Let's talk about it.
BLS. Remember that acronym, right? So breed specific legislation, define it for the people. Like, what is that? If you could give a general definition of what that is, what would you say?
It's laws that specific places put in place. It could be on a state level, it could be on a town level, it depends. But they put them in place to say that specific breeds cannot live in that area. It can be as small as an apartment building and as wide as a county. Yeah, there's a whole scale, but it decides which breeds can live there and which breeds can't.
Right. Based on potentially how violent they perceive that breed to be, right? And that's based on danger, right? Whether it's biting, whether, whatever, attacking, whatever the case might be. So again, and I wanted you to define it because I think it's important to note that this legislation, these policies, I mean, they can run the gamut, right? And so part of our conversation today is to talk about the legislation applicable to zoning. So when we talk about towns, municipalities, housing. So you talked about apartment complexes, right? And we're even talking about certain neighborhoods, right? But then insurance, haha, that's my industry. Right? Surprise! It's about insurance all along, right? I know, y'all weren't ready for that, but I'm telling you, it impacts the insurance industry as well. And so, just some more data, more information. So there are certain places that have more or stricter BSL, or even more, meaning more legislation than the number of statutes or things in place than others, right? And so we have, and it's really around towns to your preference versus like a whole state or whatnot. So we have some prevalence in towns in North Dakota and Iowa, and in Nebraska, where you're just like, huh? Right? Where, you question mark. But again, it's an attempt, right? These legislations are an attempt to keep the violence out by way of the dogs, but also in consideration of the impact that they have around keeping potentially Black and brown people out as well, right? And so that's what we want to talk about, is the impact that these legislations have. So when we think about, and we probably should have pulled up the kind of the population, the race, population, and demographics of these towns and of these states. But in theory, right, the perception is that there's not many Black people roaming around Idaho or Nebraska, right? I mean, y'all know I'm transparent, right? That's true, right? There's not many, and so then when you think about kind of what additional limitations that puts on Black people to find neighborhoods that they want to be in and live in, right? It just adds an additional level of complexity. And so when we think about zoning, right, keeping people out of neighborhoods, when we think about housing, well, let's stop there for a minute. I'll just stop on housing for a minute, because I don't think people think about that so much, right? Because, for an apartment complex to say, we don't want pit bulls. For a neighborhood to say, we don't want pit bulls, excuse me. I mean, oh, you talk about it. Like I feel like that is like inherently saying, based on the perceptions and the bias we have today, y'all. Remember, it's evolved. We don't want black and brown people.
Well, it's not even quietly saying it. It's really loudly. I don't know when we're getting into the Facebook comments, but somebody left a comment already that
Oh,
said,
come on.
years ago, the mayor of Florissant, Missouri, next to Ferguson, pulled me aside and said the reason they were enacting a pit bull ban was to keep those people out of Florissant. Unbelievable.
See?
It's very
See?
overt
It's
and
it.
intentional. Right. So if you create an association between pit bull dogs and black and brown people, which we already know America has, and then say that you cannot have those dogs that live here, you're saying exactly who you do and do not want to live there. It's very obvious.
Yeah.
And the danger that is ascribed to pit bulls is also ascribed to black and brown people. We don't want any of those dangers in our neighborhoods.
Right.
Yep.
Well, I was in Tampa and was with some colleagues from Miami-Dade County. Same thing, right? No pit bulls are allowed in Dade County. Yeah. And I even have, in my notes, right, we're talking about like even Denver keeping out Latinos and Cubans, right? Again, referencing those people. And, in Michigan, the reference of inner city people, right? We don't want them coming out into the suburbs, so therefore we restrict the dogs to keep them out as well. So you're right. It is not like shh, subtle.
Right. No. Very, very loud. Very loud.
Very loud. And so which leads me to my area of this conversation around the insurance industry. And I get asked all the time, again, why your interest? Because I think the correlation here and the impact here on insurance is much like what we've seen in, I'm going to use this word, nobody freak out, redlining, right? We've heard about redlining.
We have.
We've heard about redlining, and I feel that through insurance, it is a form of redlining when we use these practices. So let me explain what I mean.
Very interesting.
Yeah, well, look. So, like, I'm in the know now. I wasn't in the know, but I'm in the know, and it's important to me now. So, when we think about, I'm an insurance agent, and my job is to find the best coverage, right? Most comprehensive coverage for my clients at the most competitive price. But when I am helping a family out, helping an individual out that owns a dog, and part of the underwriting process is, well, do you have a pit bull, right? Or do you own a dog first? That's the first question, right? And they're asking about the breed. And subsequent to that questioning, there's an increase in premium or there's a not denial of coverage. To me, again, that is ultimately saying, because again, that data that they're basing it on is not credible data. It's based on perceptions bias, right? That you ultimately don't want my client, which most of which happen to be black and brown, well, not happen to be, which they are, that you don't want to provide coverage for them. And that ultimately impacts their ability to secure housing, right? Going back into that housing conversation, because if if you're a homeowner or even if you rent, right? Most 9 times out of 10, you have to have insurance in order to buy a house or order to rent a space. And if you can't secure insurance, then you can't get the house. So again, a lot of people say, well, that's reaching, Ngozi. That's like, but it's really not. It's really not. But like you said, like it's so overt, right? The information. I mean, look, Kassidi just went through a whole history lesson for y'all, right? But it is so real, because if we're preventing black and brown people from securing insurance, then we're ultimately preventing them from securing housing and living in, following the trail, living in the neighborhoods that they want to. So, part of my passion around this is to eliminate the discrimination and the bias that exists in our underwriting practices. So, although it's not legislation specifically as it relates to insurance, these are policies and practices that the insurance industry continues to uphold. And this is in the aggregate. There are a few companies that are looking at it differently, and we applaud them, right? We'll drop some names later if we want to. We'll tell you who's doing it well, who's not, right? But again, as an industry, we have to do better, right? If we're going to start to talk about being intentional about diversity, we can't just throw that word around, right? As if it's, the name tag that we want to have on our shirt today. But it's really looking at our practices and procedures and saying we need to change those practices, right? Because they are discriminatory,
I have a
right?
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So are there ways to get around these things if you have enough money?
So yes and no, right? I mean, like, so if the application, in the application process, right? If they're asking the question about your breed and they charge more money for you,
Okay,
because
okay.
you do. Well, if you have the money,
Right.
right? But what if you can't afford the increase?
Well, I was going to say because the income disparity and wealth disparity between black and white families is well documented. Black families, the median black family earns 61 cents on the median white family's dollar. So we know who's most likely to be able to afford that
That
premium
increase.
and who's going to be out of options. Yeah.
So again, the affordability impacts the accessibility, right? And so again, it's all in the data. All in the
It's all
facts.
in the data. It's in the
It's all in
numbers.
the data. And so again, that's where and you just kind of underscored another reason why that this is not, we're not reaching, right? This is very prevalent and there is a direct correlation. But again, if you don't have the money, then you can't afford it, then you can't purchase a higher premium.
Right.
But sometimes there's no amount of money, right? If they're saying no, we
Right.
just don't want to insure it, right? Then what do you do, right? Um, one of the organizations we work with, in addition to Animal Farm Foundation, Best Friends, has done some research around this too. And there's a story around this NFL player, I won't again mention names, where in New York tried to get housing. Now he's making money, right? He's an NFL player, he's making money, right? And could not find housing regardless
Wow.
of the price that no one will, I guess there was no price that anyone would want to charge or wanted to apply to his case, but he could not find housing in New York because he had a pit bull.
Wow.
And had to live in New Jersey, y'all. Right? Had to go to it, right? I mean, not that they're like that far
If I were making
away.
Manhattan money and I had to live in New Jersey, I'd be mad.
You be mad?
I'd be mad.
I'd be mad too,
A
right?
little bit, yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? That's kind of like, you know what I mean? Not a situation you want to be in, right? And it does aggravate, annoy, and the whole nine, right? But again, that's where affordability is as a non-issue, right? Because he could afford it, but still could not get housing in Manhattan.
That's wild.
And was banking. And was banking.
That was banking.
And was banking. So, what we also want to talk to, right? Like, okay, so we've talked about the education component, right? We really want you guys to understand that, again, the data matters, the information matters. And this is not just 10 years of data. This is not just, a century of data. I mean, slavery happened hundreds, plural, of years ago, right? And so it's this information that we need to bring forward so people understand that this is systemic, right? It's in the fabric of who we are as a society. And the more awareness that we have around it, the more we can change it. But we got to change it, right? So it not only takes myself or Kassidi as Black and brown people, but we also takes our allies, right, who support this cause to change it. So let's talk about wait.
I read this book called Anti-Racism and Animal Advocacy, which is pretty new. And in the very beginning, they're talking about how it's kind of weird how we have to be the actors and white folks are supposed to be the allies when this isn't a problem that we created.
I mean, that's a common theme around racism, period.
Right. So in that way, we should be the allies in supporting
their
folks' efforts to unpack white supremacy, dismantle white supremacy. They should have the bunt? Is that the word?
Brunt
of the burden.
So we also got an English lesson for y'all.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah.
So I get that, right? I get that. But also, I guess I'm of the opinion that we also have to have a voice in this, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think to some degree, yes, I agree. Like, white people need to kind of lead in the dismantling. But also part of this for me is we have to create awareness, right?
Absolutely.
Amongst our people, right? Because I think oftentimes we find ourselves, just accepting for, what is, just because we think we can't change it. And granted, again, I'm going back to the fact that, again, maybe we don't necessarily need to be or should be the leaders, but we should be actionable
Absolutely.
and not passive,
I
right?
agree. Yeah.
So this call to action, I don't know, what do you think the people should do?
I think you have some very great steps.
She put it back on me, y'all. Like I was trying.
Because it starts with the letters, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So you and I, so Cassie and I talked before, and we were and kind of our thought was that in order to have a voice, right? In order to change this legislation, right? Breed specific legislation we're talking about, we need to educate those who are enacting it, putting it into place, right? And I do think, and I've done a couple of kind of presentations and testimonials to insurance company legislators, insurance industry legislators and regulators, and you can see their eyes opening up, just not aware of the history, right? And so I do think through letters, right? So letters not only to your legislators and regulators, right? So in your various municipalities, but also within the insurance industry. Because for us, I mean, for me, for the insurance professionals who are on this today, who are attending, right? I mean, we are a very dominant industry in this society. Often, and as I mean, we're kind of the money industry. We have influence, right? We're able to, to have a voice in what goes and what doesn't. And so I think we need to leverage that to influence what happens in zoning, right? What happens in housing, right? So if we're saying no more discrimination from an underwriting practice, then hopefully that will shed some light on other areas and other industries. So letters, right?
I also think letters say to those folks, like, we see you.
Right.
We see what you're doing. It's not quiet, like we said.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's important, right? Because I think, a lot of things happen under the rug, right? And so having legislators, regulators, commissioners, the whole nine, hear from us, we ain't stupid. Right. We understand what's going on.
And you're not low.
Right? And we're very aware, and hence the genesis and motivation of our letter. So I agree with you, right? We have to let them know that we understand everything that exists. We're bringing it to light, and we want you to not just, appreciate is not the right word, but get on board. Damn. Just get on board. So we got the letters, and we know, like I told you I'm an actuary, so I don't write. I barely read, right? So a little something about myself. Anyway, but if you need assistance, right, a template in which to follow, we will have available, you should see running kind of across the bottom, the animalfarmfoundation.org website. And we do have template letters for people to use. Because, in the moment, you might not know what to say, right? We've said a lot in this brief time that we've been together. So in order to capture all that succinctly, in order to kind of have impact through your words, we've have some template letters. You're more than willing to tweak if you'd like, that you can use as, like I said, as a template in which to send to your commissioners, legislators, and regulators. Now, beyond letters, what else should we do? You want to talk about the allies a little bit, or the actors who? Right.
Got you there.
What do we call them? The AAs? We
can stick with allies.
Allies for now.
But you know what I'm talking about.
We don't want to complicate matters,
right?
But you know,
right.
right? So what can they do?
I think allies need to be using their positions of privilege, their power, their platforms to host these conversations, advance these conversations, and lead change. I think that the greatest thing that an ally can do is pass the mic, give someone else an opportunity, someone who has been doing this work. But I think allies need to take it upon
them. Just call it AAs. We'll just call it AAs.
Have to do the work of educating yourself, using your privilege and platform very intentionally, and paying Black and brown people who are doing the work. Yeah.
And there's that. There's that. Right, and I think that's so important, and the reason why we wanted to start with this history lesson is that education component, right? Because I think, when we talk about AAs, whether it's in the work of breach specific legislation or any aspect of this discrimination, racism conversation, you have to know what you're raising your hand for, right? You have to know what you're stepping into to better position yourself as an ally. If you don't know, then you're doing everyone a disservice. Everyone a disservice. So, just kind of going back to the reason why we wanted to lead with this history lesson, the reason why we wanted to give you a backdrop around the centuries of oppression that has existed at the hands, just a century of white supremacy, right? We're on LinkedIn, so I don't know if this is a little tough for LinkedIn, but it's because you need to be aware of that and the impact that it has had on Black and brown people, and really walk you through the timeline so you understand why we're here today, right? And create that awareness for you. So I'm here for it. I'm really here for it. I'm really here to see what comes out of this conversation. I know you keep looking on
I do be checking for questions.
Okay. We got comments, but no questions.
A good amount of comments, yeah.
Okay, so read a couple.
People are active. Okay, what do we see? Somebody said, not aware, more like choose to turn a blind eye and ignore. That's true.
That's true.
We created breed restrictions as a system of oppression, so it should be up to us to dismantle that system to prevent future harm. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, can someone like that one, check that one, heart that one?
Yeah. Questions about dog trainers who bring dogs into their homes and what insurance is. That's for you. Curious to know how.
That's like totally hard.
That's a good question.
Okay, wait, read it. So we got a little time. We got a little time.
Curious to know how homeowner insurance works around dog trainers who bring dogs into their home.
That's sticky.
Ooh.
That's real sticky because you have a couple of things at play here, right? I mean, you have the whole dog thing, right? Even though you don't own the dog, right? You're bringing them into the home, and it's kind of what we call care, custody, and control, right? You become the caretaker of that dog while that dog is in your home. So you have that exposure that might not be looked upon very positively, but then also you're operating a business in your home. So you always have to make sure the insurance company is aware of that, right? Because more than it's particularly post-pandemic, right? Well, we're still in the pandemic. A lot of insurance companies are becoming kind of keen on the fact that people are starting businesses on their home. So they're asking a lot more questions about what those businesses are. And so again, when you tie the two around being a dog trainer and having this business in your home, just make sure that your insurance company is aware, because the last thing you want to do is have these exposures sitting under that policy and they don't know, because they can definitely decline coverage, cancel you if a claim to arise and they didn't know about the exposure. So you don't want to be in that situation, not having any coverage.
Right.
But there are certain insurance companies that cover businesses under your homeowners, and who would potentially consider extending that to dog training services. I would tell you that, and I did this kind of conversation in another webinar, is that insurance companies like State Farm, Nationwide, a couple of others, or Allstate rather, are captive agents. So if you're looking to explore multiple different insurance companies and see what the options are, then you should go to an independent agent. If you're in Connecticut or the six states that I'm licensed in, holler at me. Like, just go. Right?
Wait a minute, you're not just gonna drop that in there.
No, it's 6 states, right? You got to keep it regional. But no, seriously, look for an independent agent. And we were talking earlier about certain insurance companies that have eliminated breed-specific practices. State Farm is one of them. So go State Farm.
Oh, really?
Yes. We liked Jake, the State Farm agent.
I like Jake, too.
Just saying. Just saying. So hopefully that answered your question. But if you have more questions about that, let me know. DM me. Slide into my DMs. All
We
right.
got a comment about how critical the historic perspective is, because most of us, I'm assuming, have never been exposed to this.
You want to take that one?
I agree. I agree. I think I started in the 19th century because I was looking for the roots of things that I was experiencing in my life. So I think being empowered with that historical background makes it harder for someone to just shut down,
Right.
negate, invalidate whatever you're experiencing. If you can say there's this 200-year precedent for the pattern that I'm noticing, then it's way harder for someone to be like, you're making it up. That's why I like to know my history, collect my facts, and I'm no actuary. I can't do math.
Like I barely could. That's what I'm not on right. So, no, this is perfect because I think to your point, and I just want to kind of give everyone, we have on LinkedIn, thank you, Regina. We have some links to some information. So if you're looking for more information around breed specific legislation, about advocacy, what you can do, even about kind of some of the book that was referenced before, and in some additional literature. Please go to the links that Regina has up on LinkedIn, but then also go to the Animal Farm Foundation website to get more information.
We got a question.
Oh, we got a question.
It was 2006 when I realized BSL was created for white men to take the black person's dog. I have been working to end this practice since then. I am doing my best to speak for change, but what do you think the most important three things for people like me to do are for people like me to do?
So she's already educated. She's already aware. She's out there trying to make change.
Trying to make change. I think the question is asking what should you keep in mind, because it sounds like you're doing the work I would ask you to do already, which is just being aware of your positionality in these cases, and speaking up. A lot of folks in rescue don't realize that what they're doing is taking dogs out of black and brown homes and putting them into white middle class families, especially pit bulls. That's we're getting into the Harlan Weaver subject.
Okay, wait, hold on. Did you see? Like she put her phone down. Like she was like, "We about to do it."
Harlan Weaver.
Okay, tell the people who Harlan Weaver is.
Harlan Weaver is this author, researcher, doctor who works also on pit bulls, but more generally on our relationship with animals and how it changes us and changes them. So his book is Bad Dog, Pit Bull Politics and Multi-Species Justice. So that's where you get more into the theory beyond just the historical facts. So Harlan Weaver talks about how a pit bull is perceived when standing next to a black man and how a pit bull is perceived standing next to a white woman are very different. And how a lot of rescue right now is trying to align these dangerous breeds less and less with blackness, more and more with white middle class family values. So I think keeping that in mind when you're doing your promotion. Harlan Weaver also has this part. No, not Harlan Weaver. Katia Gunther. Yes, has this a part in her article about how she sees this brown man brings his dog, has to rehome his dog because he can no longer barely afford to take care of himself now. Wants this dog that he loves to have a better home, better family. And then later on, the person working in this rescue sees that the rescue has talked about how this dog has been discarded like trash. Which is just simply not the truth.
Right.
It touches this emotional register that appeals to white saviors who want to snatch up this dog faster to rescue it from the big mean brown man that just kicked it out. But that's not the story of what happened at all. So I think being aware of the narratives around rescue, the narrative we use in rescue is also very important to keep in mind. What else is important? Do you have any tips?
Me? No, amen. I just agree. I was second all that.
Yeah, I think keep doing your best to speak for change. And I think empowering yourself with the data, with the history is going to help you do that. Keep spreading the word, keep sharing events like this, share articles that you find. Keep following people, change makers like this. You know what I'm saying?
And change makers like this.
You can follow me too. Yeah, I think keeping that conversation alive is a big part of the work.
Well, and I think you hit on something that I think oftentimes we forget about period in the work that we do, right? Is the narrative, right? And being able and to understand, not necessarily put yourself in their shoes, but understand the story behind and the viewpoint and the perspective behind those that you're looking to support and to help. And so that narrative component becomes so important, right? And it just goes back to the education and awareness and the whole nine. But specifically speaking, understanding the narrative. So again, underscore amen, thumbs up, peace, like the whole nine.
Yes, and questioning your own biases and the biases of the folks
Oh,
around you. Keep them in mind. Just keep them in mind. Ooh, we got
so
quiet.
so, but you know what? I keep looking at the clock because you keep bringing up stuff, and I'm just like, oh god, we're gonna run out of time. But no, but that is important too because people show up not recognizing their own bias. You know, we're all biased, right? And I often say bias is kind of neutral. It's about how you apply it, right? That becomes the issue, right? Because I don't care who you are, what race you are, where you come from, and your experiences. You have all experienced something that has shaped your view, that has shaped how you see things. And so as you understand other people's narratives, right, you have to be able to recognize your own bias and how that's showing up and how that's playing a part and how you're executing on things and applying your allyship, right, to a situation. And so I'm such a big proponent for that because people, want to show up all day, right? And it's not just for allies, it's for us, our AAs, right? AAs, I keep forgetting, right? It's even for us as a Black and brown community and how our bias shows up, right? And recognizing that we have bias as well. Like we're not immune from it. It's like it's not like something that just only is applicable to white people, but we all have bias, and sometimes we have to make sure even as Black and brown people that we check that, right? And we're not complicating matters by bringing our bias to the table. And I get it, right? We've been marginalized, we've been oppressed, and so that affords us some leniency, I would say. Can I use that reference? But we still got to recognize it for what it is. So
The working definition of racism that I use is prejudice plus power. We all have our prejudices.
Right.
But when you have state power, institutional power behind your prejudices, that's when it becomes really dangerous for people. It starts impacting lives on a grand scale. It's not interpersonal. It's huge. There's another question saying that my insurer knows I chose them because they don't discriminate by breed, even though my dogs are not pit bulls. Can this kind of pressure be effective? So I think this person is asking, should more people tell the people that are insuring them, be vocal about the people that are insuring them, that they chose them specifically?
Most definitely. And so that's why we even mentioned State Farm, right? Because if everybody goes to State Farm, even though I might be out of a job, if everybody goes to State Farm, because I'm an independent, right?
Wait a minute.
I'll just join Kassidy's camp. But yes, I think so. I mean, let's be real. Insurance companies are here to make money, right? They're here to make a profit. And so if insureds start to create or have this voice and awareness around, I'm not going with you, insurance company A, because you have breed restrictions, then they're going to lose money. And they're going to start to rethink their position around that, or at least do the research, right? Better research, more substantial research around, bites and breeds and behavior, and really come to the position that, maybe we aren't doing this right. So, amen. Yeah, that is definitely a pressure point. Maybe I should start my own insurance company. Y'all should come be with me. We'll call it the No Breed Restrictions Insurance Company.
There we go.
But no, I think that is a great idea. The more people you start to tell about the insurance company you're with and they have the same experience as you, again, the more that will move from other insurance companies, and maybe we'll have a real serious conversation in our industry about removing or eliminating breed-specific policies and practices.
I think that's all we got.
Y'all good. Like, we love the engagement here. Love it. So on that note, we thank you. We thank you. I thank you, Kassidi. Say thank you to the people.
Thank you.
We enjoyed it. And I know, I love to have conversations where there is laughter and fun, but there is seriousness to this topic. And so we hope that that resonated with you at some level, at some form or fashion. And again, the purpose here is not just to educate and bring awareness, but to ask you to do something. Call of action. Write some letters, have a voice, tell people about insurance companies, all the things that we've talked about today. And again, if you need assistance, go to that Animal Farm Foundation website.org. Holla at Kassidi on Instagram. I guess holla at me too on LinkedIn. We'll do whatever we can. We'll answer whatever questions that you have. And we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.